welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. We are going to talk about today's probably biggest video game related news story, and that is the demise of the eShop for, there we go, finally, holy fuck, my antifreeze is defrosted. The demise of the eShop for the Wii U and the Nintendo 3DS, and why I have a problem with these eShops anyway. And again, email 30minutereviews@gmail.com if you can explain this to me, because I don't understand it, and there's something I fundamentally don't understand. And by the way, if you're listening on Apple, on iTunes or on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. It helps us out greatly. The more I keep forgetting to bring that up, but anyway, please, if I'm explaining something wrong, and maybe I'm just not understanding why this is the case, but I need someone to explain it to me. Here's my problem. I understand the semantic reason why there are some games that can't transfer on the shop. Controllers change, and I think this is really mostly a problem with Nintendo because of how wildly Nintendo changes their controller from year to year. Like PlayStation doesn't do it as much, but and Xbox I don't think has changed their controller substantially since the 360 era. I mean, in terms of like what it physically looks like and what buttons it has. But the Switch ostensibly has the same controls as, like, physically there as both the 3DS and the Wii U. Especially considering that the Wii U, it actually has more buttons than the Wii U. But the Wii U has, other things. Like, the Wii U has, the second screen and all of that. So, I understand why games that make use of the second screen in a substantive capacity can't be ported over to the Switch. I understand that completely. I don't understand why games that don't make use of that, or games that are from past consoles that were available on the Wii U, like the Wii U had a huge library of virtual console games. And I feel like here's my thing. If it's a virtual console game and it is coded to the Wii U, there is no reason why that game cannot be ported to the Switch. And I think the problem is, like, there are games that will probably not be able to be played in a meaningful way after a certain point. If we look at this from an objective standpoint, like, there are Game Boy games that were on the 3DS. Like, I'm going to use games that I owned for the example here, because I owned the game, so I can speak to what was there for these games. Like Pokemon, what's it called? Pokemon, what the fuck is going on up there? I'm afraid to ask. Oh, it's the train going through. Okay. On the 3DS, they had Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, and then Gold, Silver, Crystal. Let me use that as the example. Those games are not available because Game Boy games are currently not available on the Switch through Switch Online. Switch Online is only NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, and N64. But again, in those games, in those consoles, it's only selected titles. It's not all games. Like, I can't go on there and be like, okay, here's the entire catalog of games for the N64 that I want to play. Here are 10 titles from the N64 that I can play a few of. And if I'm going to play this game, it should, here's the issue, is that we live in a world where people managed to create computer software and ROMs and all of that stuff to play, old games on their computer. So, if I were so inclined, I can go on the internet, download a software that'll let me play, what the fuck? That's fucking annoying. That'll let me play, every game from the Game Boy through the through the DS. I mean, you can get all of them. There are all of that stuff available for basically every console that's ever existed. Especially the older ones that didn't have anti-piracy measures designed to keep that from happening. So if I go on and I play, these games, I won't be able to, you'll be able to do, play the games on the computer as if they were brand new. In a world where that's possible, in a world where looking at the Nintendo consoles over the years and the controllers haven't lost buttons, there is no reason why this is the case that these games aren't being ported over wholesale. And I understand why, if I buy a physical game and it doesn't get, it is interesting that this train is putting the number of car on the outside of the train. That's an interesting kind of decision. But there is I understand the rationale why. If I buy a physical copy of a game, I can't get a new physical copy of the game. In the same way that if I buy a VHS, I'm not entitled to get a new DVD and then a new Blu-ray and then a new 4K. That's not how the world works. Like I understand that. That said, if I buy a movie virtually, like if I go on, if I go on Amazon Prime and buy a movie, and then I get a new phone, it'll transfer to the new phone. And it shouldn't be that difficult to remap the controller. And if, that's the only difference that should be happening between consoles. I mean, am I wrong? Am I missing something here, some key part of this that, what is keeping this from happening? Where it's we're going to keep this, we're going to keep this issue, we're going to keep reissuing these games, because it gives an opportunity to resell them, yes, but, take, the Wii U release to the Metroid Prime trilogy, on the console. Why is it that the Metroid Prime trilogy, as released on the Wii U, was not made available on the Switch to download if you had already purchased it? That's the thing. It's there should have been a blanket update for these games going into the next console generation. Fuck, man, I'm so light again. Oh, okay, that's a maneuver. It should be where it's it's not like the controller changed enough where it's okay, we're not gonna be able to play these games now, to the point where Breath of the Wild came out on both consoles at the same time. If it was such a difficult thing to do to make this game different for both consoles, then they would have had, Breath of the Wild wouldn't have come out on the Wii U. Because the Wii U was not selling well enough where it's oh, okay, well, we'll get it here, and then, eventually... It's not like it was a Wii and then, the next console up. It was the Wii U, which sold terribly. It would be if Sega made another console that was selling like hotcakes after the Saturn, and they were okay, well, we'll release it for the Sega Saturn and also for the new one. It's no. You want people to get the new one because the old one sold like shit. If you made it exclusively for the old one, people may have bought it. But they didn't do that. They released it on, and at the same time, it's how many copies of Breath of the Wild for the Wii U are currently sitting in stores not moving? I would venture a guess that it's a lot. I would say there's a lot of these copies that didn't move. Not everyone is me and bought this game. Because I had that. I had bought, Breath of the Wild for the Wii U because I could not get my hands on the Switch when it first came out. Because it was hard to get a hold of. And the Wii U had a lot of issues. The Wii U did not have didn't have a mainline, it didn't have a lot of mainline games, which is a weird thing, because it's the Wii U had so many games that just didn't happen but normally would. Like, Mario Kart 8 was not enough to do it. Like, there was no mainline Zelda game exclusively for that console. There was no mainline... We're getting way off topic here, because it's not about the failings of the Wii U we're talking about the issues that come about when we talk, like, with not allowing these games for sale anymore. And I think that as a company that's offering a product, the answer of we're not supporting the product anymore, I mean, look, it's ridiculous to say that they should be forced to indefinitely offer the product. Like, it's ridiculous to say that Nintendo should be forced to, not offer the product, but indefinitely, offer it for purchase, yes, offer it for, on these older systems, in the same way that we don't expect that, like, hey, we need you to make VHSs still. Like, no one does that. And there was an era where we had to switch over TVs, and there were converter boxes for sale. Now, TVs have been built in, but there was an era before the TV had that, and before it went all digital. That was like 2009, I want to say. Like, the main issue I have that we keep coming back to is that if the game is digital, and the next controller doesn't have a substantive difference as to why that controller cannot be used to play the game, and the game itself doesn't have mechanics that would need to be entirely reworked to fit that, like, Nintendo Land would not work on a Switch. It wouldn't, because it is too dependent on the second screen. There are a few games, not many, but there are a few games that are dependent on the second screen. And the fact that they just opted not to release these games on the Switch tells me that at the end of the day, it's like, I hate saying this because it feels disingenuous, because the industry is built on making money, but, it doesn't feel right that these games are just going to be now lost, where it's like, I need to keep my console that worked only for a few games. I gotta keep this console around to play these games, otherwise that money I spent is now gone forever. And I think that, the idea of maybe making games as NFTs might be an interesting thing, where if I buy a game on the blockchain, and again, keeping in mind, I know nothing about NFTs. I've only started recently looking into this and what an NFT is and how it works and what the blockchain is and all of that. I know very little about this. And as a science fiction writer, I feel like this is something I need to rectify. Because I know nothing about how any of this works. But if I buy if I make a game on the blockchain, for lack of a better word, if I make a game on the blockchain, then that would give ownership to the game to the person, and then they would be able to, sell the game to someone else. It would create the ability to, play the game later and always have access to it. Because I would assume, that part of the appeal of the blockchain, as it's been described to me so far, is that there won't be an issue where, as things upgrade in the future, you won't lose what you already have. Because I feel like that's the appeal of cryptocurrency, to an extent, is that what you have is yours, and it is valued against the dollar in a weird way that, it varies, but I don't understand. I don't understand a lot of this. But if that's the case, and games can be minted onto the blockchain, then why is it that eShops aren't running on that? Or eShops aren't being made to run on that? And I think that the reason why government hasn't caught up to this is that the environment has changed so much over the last 30 years that it doesn't know what to do. Like, it's changing so much and so rapidly that they don't know what to do. Where it's like, but between just social media and the permeation of social media into every facet of life, like, what's going to happen when social media, as defined, also includes the metaverse? And I was listening to a talk today about the metaverse, and how the metaverse can be applied into retail and into working sectors. And it's like, well, how does this get applied in that case? Where it's like, now we're going to broaden the definition, and there's a lot of, oh my god, I can't believe these fucking lights. There are a lot of things that just aren't being dealt with, because it's like now we talk about ownership issues and how does ownership play with, like, how does ownership rights work in a world where we can create, basically authenticity for everything. And as of right now, it cannot be cloned. But then what happens when the ability happens that something can be copied? What happens then? And we're going to look at NFTs and the metaverse and all of that. It's going to be looked at broadly as, we're creating Second Life, but on a larger scale with virtual reality. But there's a lot more to it than that. And I think that if we're going to look at, if we're looking at how does this relate to the eShop closing, it's like, well, if I buy something at a bookstore or I buy something at Walmart, like let's say I go to, we'll use Walgreens as an example because Walgreens is constantly closing stores and blaming it on poor people. But let's say I go to a Walgreens and buy a pack of, Zyrtec and then leave. And then a month later, the store closes down. That Zyrtec is still mine. I still paid money to have that Zyrtec. It's not the idea of I paid money to have access to that Zyrtec while the store was open. And then if I go to a new house, I don't lose the Zyrtec. And I'm not just stuck without the Zyrtec. It is, whatever 3DS you have when the shop closes, that's the 3DS you're stuck with from then on. Otherwise, you lose your games. Same thing with Wii U. If you go out and buy a Wii U, which I would recommend people do, because the Wii U had quite a few hidden gems, and it had probably the most robust virtual catalog of any game console there is. But the issue is, once you have that Wii U, and once you buy your games on your Wii U, you're stuck with that Wii U. Something happens to it, you're fucked. You're done. And you have now, all that money that you put into it is gone, and there is nothing you can do to get it back. And I feel like that's kind of an issue. That's kind of a big problem that needs to be addressed with, ownership of games. And I think that that's why game companies are, like, when we look at, like, what NFTs are being used for so far, they're being used for cosmetic skins and things like that. Things that they're okay with giving you ownership of. Things that they're okay with giving you the ability to be like, hey, this is mine. I paid money for it. And now from here on, this is mine. And I heard someone say, like, oh, well, this means that I'll be able to carry it over from game to game. Like, not the case, but, within the confines of that game, that is yours. But then what happens when that game closes down? What happens to that property then? And I know it sounds like I have the answers, and I don't. But I'm just thinking out loud about what does this mean? Like, these are big, not just philosophical questions about what constitutes ownership, but legal questions about what constitutes ownership that aren't being answered. And up until now, we've been okay with the idea of games as a service in the same way we think of movies as a service. Like, I can't go to a movie and be like, and watch the movie and then walk out and go to the person there and be like, that sucked, I want my money back, and expect that to happen. In the same way that I can't go to like a theater, see a play and be like, that sucked, I want my money back. I can't do that at a concert. I can't, like, unless something happens that keeps it from happening, keeps my experience that I paid for from happening, I can't have that. Like, books, as long as you don't say that the reason you're returning it is because you don't like it, you can return your book that you buy. If you go to Walmart, you can return a book. If you go to Target, you can return a book. Like a DVD, if I buy a DVD and then have buyer's remorse, as long as I didn't open it, I can return the DVD and get my money back. Like, same thing with video games. Like, I can return it and get my money back. And I talked about this quite a bit with Deformers. This is the first, real reckoning I had with, here, like, I don't want to rehash let's rehash the Deformers issue, because the Deformers issue was kind of a big one for me. Deformers was a game that was released for multi-platform by a studio that was owned by GameStop, and GameStop showed this game hard while you were in the store. Like that, how the TV that plays the thing running, and it's kind of like GameStop's version of Nuvi before you go to a movie theater. And it's just like, we're going to talk about all the games that are coming. And one of the games they shelled hard for was Deformers. It's not labeled anywhere in the store that, like, oh, by the way, we own the company that makes Deformers, but you buy Deformers, you play it, and then it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to play this game. You play the game, and you're like, oh, this should have been free to play. Like, this should have 100% been free to play. This game is shit. It's not fun. It's entirely online. And this game was, like, and I bought this game in 2018, 2019. Game's entirely online, and then, like, 2 months after I bought it, they discontinued support. And I'm like, so I paid money for this, and now I want my money back because I bought it from you, and then your company discontinued support for it. Why is that my problem? And it's like, GameStop has a lot of problems like this, where it's like, I also bought, like, a copy of Mercenaries 2 digitally from GameStop's eShop. That, like, they had a version of, like, Steam and Origin and Epic and the Epic Game Store and GOG back in, like, 2012 when I bought a copy of Mercenaries 2 from it. So I buy Mercenaries 2 and, I play it. GameStop, that laptop broke, so I bought a new laptop, and when I got the new laptop, I couldn't get the game anymore because the game that I had purchased was bound to that store account, and that service got shut down. So then you're just, oh, can I have my game? No, you can't have your game, because you gotta provide some sort of, like, you gotta transfer the key, but there was no key because you bought it virtually in the game, in the store. So you see what I mean when I say that, like, they design these things to keep your money while making it as hard as possible to use your service across multiple devices. And it's not just Nintendo, but Nintendo right now is the subject of my ire, because they're the ones who did it here. And I think this is the most egregious case, because there are so many games that came out that did not make use of the gamepad, but are, currently locked behind, oh, well, you have to have it there. Like, I understand some 3DS games why you can't do it. Like, I would understand, like, if there were 3DS games that, like, oh, okay, well, you can't port these, it's like, okay, well, those have 2 screens. It would take a lot more work to port those games. And looking at, like, how they did DS games on the Wii U, which they did do, and it was not the way you would think, where it's like, okay, so we have the top screen, that is your TV, and the bottom screen is your gamepad. No, it was both squeezed into one screen. Where it was, like, half and half. And it's like, well, they figured it out for that. So, if they want to, they can figure it out, but they don't want to. And why won't they want to? It's like, well, because they want to repackage it to you and resell it to you. And, looking at it, where it's like, looking at other examples of this, like, yeah, they want to resell you a DVD, or yeah, they want to resell you they want to sell you a Blu-ray after you want a DVD, and they want to sell you a 4K after you want a Blu-ray. Like, they want to do all of that. Like, they're not going to say no to your money if you go and upgrade your edition to a higher definition. Like, but the thing is, they didn't say you can't use your DVDs on a Blu-ray player. And they didn't say you can't use your what's it called? They didn't say you can't use your Blu-ray, your DVDs on a 4K Blu-ray player. They still work. It is entirely anti-consumer practice, and it's not just Nintendo who does it. I talked about GameStop, but also Sony does this. Like, I bought games that were PlayStation Classics that I bought on the PlayStation 3, and across all of the PlayStation consoles, that use the PlayStation eShop, which are, let's say, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, PlayStation Vita, PlayStation Portable. Like, all of those games and all of those consoles had, the ability had basically the same control scheme. Like, I could point to any one of those games and be like, okay, the controls are basically the same. Like, the PSP didn't have 2 triggers, it had 1. Maybe some of them have haptic feedback, maybe some of them don't. I don't remember definitively one way or the other, but it does, it's one of those things where, like, I can point to an example right here and be like, look, you can move these pretty easily. Like, these are movable. And the thing was, too, it's like, you can play the games on the PS3, you could also play them on the PSP at the same time. And it's like, there were games that made use of the triggers, on both triggers, the R1, R2, and L1, L2, both. And both were playable on the PSP. And that should have been like, okay, we're just going to keep doing this. Where it's like it's playable there, it'll be playable on the next one. And then you got the PS4. Unless the developer had made it where it was available on the PS4, it was not just ported over. Like I had Race to Sun, which is playable on both the PSP and the it's playable on both the PS4 and the PS5 and the PS3. But there are games where that's not there were games where it wasn't available. Like I had Crash Bandicoot that I had bought. That was not available on the PS4 after I had bought it on the PS3. And the reason is they want you to rebuy it. And not every game you bought was immediately available on the next-gen console for playing at the same time. And the idea that the company is giving that to you then later, it's like, well, no. Because every other industry where this happens, you were able to do that. Like, look at how music worked. Where it's like, even going physical to digital for music, and I know it's not at all the same thing, but it kind of, and that's the thing with PC, too. I can pick up a game that, I can go to, there's a Liquidator closeout place that I know of that sells really old PC games. I can buy, School Tycoon or Prison Tycoon or any of these old-ass PC games. I can go in, buy the game, no matter what computer I get, as long as the computer's minimum requirements are met, I can play it on that computer. Because the computer can do it from then on. And it's like, why is it that when it comes to consoles, we're just kind of okay with the fact that they're just like, okay, well, whatever. You don't need to have the ability to play these games past the date that you originally bought, past the console you originally bought them on. And the way they cloak it is, oh, you're not buying the game, you're paying for a license to play this game on this console. And it's like, well, then lower the price. If I'm paying that price, and that price is the same as it was back when I was able to play it on all consoles, then lower the price, because I'm not getting the same service. And again, this is why, you can't even say, oh, well, now you just know not to go on to, virtual stores, but the issue is, a lot of the games I'm referring to for the 3DS and the Wii U are not games that were ever made available on those consoles, on physical. You couldn't go and buy, what's it called? I couldn't go to the store and buy a physical copy of the Metroid Prime trilogy for the Wii U. That was never released in that format. You could only buy it on the eShop. You couldn't go to the store and buy a physical copy of Gold, Silver, Crystal, Red, Blue, Yellow. You could buy a little code for it, because they were selling the code for it, but you couldn't buy the game, a cartridge that had the game on it. You were just kind of stuck. And if you look at, what was available for the, for the, for the 3DS and all of that, it's there's a big part of ownership that goes into physical that's not just, what we see in digital. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's a big thing that's worth addressing going forward, where, I've been way all over the place today with this. But it's one of those things where it's it is a financial issue. No other hobby makes it as hard to use what you're doing beyond a certain point. Even if you do collectible cards, they won't outright ban your cards. I mean, sometimes they do. Pokemon's big about that, where it's after a certain point, you can only use recent sets, and it cycles where it's you have to keep updating your deck with new cards. But Yu-Gi-Oh, you can use old cards all the way back to the first set. And, you probably won't win if you use only cards going all the way back to the first set. But, you can use those cards still. The same cards that I bought back in the late 90s, early 2000s still work now. And still give the same, the same result. Well, not necessarily the same result. When Ixie was a thing, or when Synchro was a thing, the Morphtronic deck was huge. And the Morphtronic deck was huge for, for Link, as a counter to Link, to an extent, because of its ability to limit, attacking monsters. And Morphtronic came out during the Synchro era, because it was one of their dragons. It was Power Tool Dragon was one of the things there. And if you see how these things kind of evolve and change over the years, it's they don't outright ban, they just change the rules of the game and introduce new card types that make it where older decks will be at a disadvantage, which admittedly is not a great thing to do for long-standing players, but what they want to do is all of these things want to keep younger people in. So it's a way to cycle in younger players, the people who are going to, go out and buy the new structure decks to get into the game for the first time. But yeah, I feel like there's definitely something wrong with this scenario where, how much money you would put into, like, I kind of want to go onto my Wii U now and be like, how much money did I spend on my Wii U and on my 3DS over the years? And be like, look, I spent all this money. Like, this is how much money I spent on these consoles, and this is a lot of money that went into just buying games that I will no longer have access to after a certain point. And I understand the scarcity of it, and it's like, look, I can't go into GameStop and get a copy of Diamond for less than $70. Like, that's not a joke. Go into a GameStop that sells DS games and look for a copy of Pokemon Diamond or Pearl. Pokemon Diamond, the last one I went to, was going for $75, and I was like, that's insane. And I feel like there's, something that should be said about what's going to end up happening with used Wii U's come next March that have these games installed on them. Because that's going to be a big thing, where it's like, go out, buy a used Wii U, factory reset it, buy the games that you think are going to be big, and then sell the Wii U on eBay for a substantial margin, and you'll, be making a good amount of money. And I know people are going to say, just jailbreak it, just homebrew it, just, do whatever you want to do to it. But what I'm saying is, if I'm going to, the industry only exists as long as people put money into it. And as long as people are putting money into it, we will continue to get new games. If people don't put money into the games, they will not get new games. And therein lies the issue here. It's kind of a conundrum where it's like, look, if we want this to happen, it needs to happen in this way. I don't know. It's a pretty long episode where I kind of ramble a lot, and I feel like there's kind of a discussion to be had wider, but I will have to read more about, like, how the metaverse works and how, blockchain and all of that, because I feel like that's a big part of how gaming is going to change going forward. And I feel like it depends. Like, I feel like the blockchain has to have, like, infinite storage space on it if people are talking about using it for what they're talking about using it for. But yeah, I'm gonna wrap up here for today because I'm tired and I'm on my way home, and I'm currently trying to get over, but this asshole won't let me over. Once we get over, I'll end the show. Next episode will be whenever something new happens, as per the usual. And then on top of that, we will be discussing Peacemaker later this week when the finale hits. Boeing Downfall. The story of Boeing is coming out on Netflix on Friday. We'll be talking about that. Beware of spoilers. And I feel like there's something else we're going to talk about. Oh, Uncharted comes out on Thursday, or tomorrow, as some call it. We'll be talking about that then. So until then, have a great rest of your week.